Ever been betrayed so deeply that your hands literally shake? Not from fear, but from the rage you're trying to hide? My name's Jake Miller, and this is the story of how my boss tried to ruin my life, and how, years later, I made sure he paid for it. If you've ever wished you could serve justice to someone who thought they could get away with anything, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready. Because this isn't just a revenge story. It's about patience, betrayal, and karma hitting harder than anyone expected. I never planned to be the kind of guy who holds grudges. But some betrayals carve so deep they never quite heal. They just wait, waiting for the right moment to bleed again. Back in 2015, I was 32, a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing company in Colorado. I'd been working there for almost 8 years. Quiet, reliable, the kind of employee who kept his head down and hit deadlines. My boss, Richard Halden, was the complete opposite. Richard was the kind of man who loved being the loudest voice in the room, sharp suits, slicked back hair, the kind of confidence that made everyone else shrink a little. He was one of those type A alphas who thrived on control. If you were doing well, he'd find a way to remind you he was still above you. He didn't just want power, he wanted submission. I tolerated him because honestly I liked my job, and I'd learned to keep my distance. Until he found out about Claire. Claire worked at our company's second branch 2 states over. We met during a joint project. She was sweet, funny, and absolutely brilliant with logistics. Long distance wasn't easy, but we made it work. Late night video calls, weekend visits. We were both saving up to close that distance for good. For months, I kept our relationship quiet. Richard had a reputation, especially with women in the company. He was married to Linda, the HR manager, but everyone knew he cheated. He treated his flings like trophies. His disgusting little hobby? Photography. He loved taking souvenir pictures with the women he seduced, proof of conquest. Some he'd even show off behind closed doors, snickering with his buddies like it was some frat boy game. Nobody dared report him. He was too high up, too protected. The day Richard found out about me and Claire, I remember the smirk on his face. He leaned on my cubicle wall like he owned the air I was breathing. "So, Miller," he said, "I hear you've got yourself a long-distance sweetheart. From the Phoenix office, right? Claire, something." I froze. I hadn't told anyone except one co-worker I thought I could trust. Apparently, office gossip traveled fast. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," he replied with that snake smile. "Maybe I'll say hi next time I visit." And he walked away, whistling. That was the moment my gut told me something was about to go very, very wrong. A few weeks later, Richard announced a review tour. He was visiting all regional offices to evaluate performance. Phoenix was on the list. Claire called me that night, her voice uneasy. "Jake, your boss Richard, he was here today." "Yeah, I figured he'd stop by." "How'd it go?" "Weird," she said. He kept staring. He asked about my weekends if I get lonely here. Stuff that didn't sound work-related. I clenched my jaw. I told her to keep things professional and to stay cautious. But deep down, I knew Richard never did professional. 3 days later, she called again, crying. "Jake, I think I'm fired." "What? Why?" He said my reports were incomplete, that I've been distracted. But that's not true. Jake, he was making passes at me. I told him I had a boyfriend, and he got angry. Next morning, HR told me I was done. My chest felt like it collapsed inward. He'd actually done it. He'd destroyed her career because she rejected him. I drove all night to her place. When she opened the door, her eyes were red, her desk packed in boxes. She fell into my arms, shaking. "He ruined everything," she whispered. He smirked when he handed me the papers, Jake, like he knew you'd find out. I wanted to storm into his office, slam his smug face into the nearest wall. But I knew that's exactly what he wanted, to make me react, to get me fired next. So I stayed quiet, cold on the outside, burning on the inside. For months after that, I kept working like a ghost. Clock in, clock out. But every time I saw Richard's reflection in the break room window and laughing, bragging, pretending to be the company hero, a little part of me planned his downfall. Claire struggled to find another job for a while. I helped her with bills, supported her emotionally, but the resentment sat between us like smoke we couldn't clear. She'd often say, "Jake, please don't do anything stupid." And I'd force a smile. "I won't, I promise." But promises made in anger are made of glass. They only hold until the heat breaks them. Years passed. Richard got promoted again. His arrogance doubled. He even started mentoring new hires, giving them life advice about ethics and leadership. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. But with time came patience. I started observing him more carefully in what he did, where he kept his things, how he operated. I noticed something odd. Richard was paranoid about his office. He'd lock it every time he stepped out, even for lunch. And he always carried a keychain that jangled with more keys than anyone needed. One Friday evening, as we worked late on a project, I saw him close his office door, lock it, and slip that keychain into his coat pocket. He glanced at me and grinned. "Big weekend ahead, Miller?" "Just catching up on blueprints," I said. "You should try photography sometime," he said with a wink, then walked off. That word, photography, sent chills down my spine. Everyone in the company had heard rumors of his photo collection. No one had proof. No one dared look. That's when an idea started forming. Slow, dangerous, intoxicating. If he had those photos and if I could find them, I could finally end him. One Saturday, I was called in for overtime. We had a machine calibration project due Monday, and I was the only one trusted with it. The office was nearly empty, just me. The faint hum of fluorescent lights, and the distant echo of the cleaning crew moving down the hall. As I was finishing up, I noticed the janitor unlocking offices one by one. When she reached Richard's door, she turned the key, left it ajar, and started heading toward accounting. That's when my heartbeat started to thunder. I don't even remember deciding. My body just moved. I grabbed a clipboard to look busy, stepped inside his office, and quietly shut the door behind me. The air felt heavier in there. Cologne, coffee, and arrogance. His desk was spotless, almost sterile, except for one locked drawer on the right. I crouched, pulled gently, locked, of course. Then I saw it. A small ring of backup keys hanging from a hook behind his filing cabinet. He must have kept it for emergencies. I tried one key. Didn't fit. Second one. Click. The drawer slid open with a sigh. Inside were some contracts, receipts, and a shoebox. A plain brown shoebox. My pulse spiked. I lifted it. It was heavy. When I opened the lid, my stomach turned. Stacks of glossy photos. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Different women. Different rooms. Some even in the office. And him, Richard, smiling like the devil himself in every single one. There it was. The proof. His downfall, sitting right in my hands. I stood there paralyzed. This was it. Everything I'd waited for. But my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the box. Voices fought in my head. "This is wrong, Jake. You could go to jail for this. He destroyed Claire's life. He deserves everything coming." I heard the janitor's cart rolling closer. I had seconds, so I did the only thing my heart would let me do. I grabbed the entire stack of photos, stuffed them inside my blueprint tube, and walked out, closing the door behind me as calmly as I could. As I walked past the cleaning lady, she smiled politely. "All done, Mr. Miller?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a grin. "Just finishing some drawings." "All right then, have a good night." If she'd looked closely, she might have noticed the tremor in my hands. But she didn't. That night I drove home with my heart racing like a drum. Claire was asleep when I got there. I stood in the living room, staring at that tube, realizing what I'd done. There was no turning back. That night I didn't sleep. I kept staring at those photos, wondering if revenge was worth becoming someone I'd promised I'd never be. But by morning, the answer was clear. Last night, I broke into my boss's office. I found his private stash, hundreds of photos. He took with women he cheated on his wife with, and one of those women was almost my fiancée. I took everything. Now it's time to make him pay. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my couch, the tube of stolen photos beside me, and 1,000 thoughts clawing at my head. Part of me was terrified. What if he noticed they were gone? What if security checked cameras? What if he came for me? But the other part, the darker part, it was thrilled. After years of humiliation, I finally held his entire world in my hands. Every secret, every disgusting act he'd hidden behind that fake smile. He'd fired Claire, bragged about other women, destroyed lives like it was a sport, and still walked around like a god among men. But not anymore. This was the first night in years I didn't feel powerless, and I wasn't going to waste it. When morning came, I wrapped the photos in an old towel and tucked them in my toolbox, locked it, and drove to work like nothing happened. Richard wasn't there. He was out on a business trip to Chicago for the week. Perfect. That week I played my role better than ever. Smiling, calm, invisible. Inside I was rehearsing every possible move, every way this could end. I had the photos. But what was the right play? If I handed them to HR, they'd bury it. If I leaked them online, it would backfire. Lawsuits, investigations, collateral damage. But if I sent them to someone who had the most to lose, someone with power and motive, then it would be clean, quiet, and devastating. That someone was his wife, Linda Halden, HR manager, sharp, composed, the kind of woman who could see through anyone. She'd been with Richard for over 15 years. She knew his moods, his habits, his charm. But I doubted she knew the full truth. The irony was painful. She was the one who had to process Claire's termination. Papers, the same termination, her own husband engineered. And now, she was about to discover the monster she married. I spent the next few days studying Richard's patterns. His schedule, his trips. He'd be back Monday afternoon, meaning I had just the weekend to make my move. Friday night, I drove out of town, 2 hours away, to avoid any security link. I checked into a small roadside motel with cash, no paper trail. Inside, I laid out everything on the bed like evidence in a detective movie. Hundreds of photos, sorted by faces, locations, timestamps. I wasn't proud of how methodical I'd become, but when you're plotting revenge, the line between justice and obsession gets blurry. Claire called that night. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just busy at work." "You sure? You sound different." "I'm fine, Claire. Don't worry about me." I couldn't tell her, not yet. Not until it was done. I narrowed down the selection. I didn't need all of them, just enough to destroy him beyond repair. A dozen, maybe 15 photos, each one clear, each one unmistakable. Richard's face front and center, and none of the women were his wife. That was important. I didn't want innocent people dragged into this. I didn't want to ruin lives, just his. When I was done sorting, I placed the chosen photos in a plain white envelope. No fingerprints, no handwriting, just truth. On the front, I wrote in block letters, "For Mrs. Linda Halden, private and confidential." Saturday morning, I drove to Richard's neighborhood. Quiet, upscale, with perfect lawns and shiny mailboxes. I parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie. The adrenaline was unreal. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. Every sound, every barking dog, every car passing by made me flinch. But there was no turning back now. When I reached his house, I slipped the envelope into the mailbox, flipped the red flag up and walked away. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Half a block later, I glanced back once, just once. The house looked peaceful, completely unaware that a storm was about to hit it from the inside. For the next 2 days, I lived in a strange limbo. Every hour felt like a countdown to detonation. At work, I acted normal, cracking small jokes, keeping my head down, pretending life was ordinary. But inside, my thoughts spun like wildfire. Would she open it right away? Would she confront him? Would she tell HR? Or would Richard find it first and trace it back to me? By Monday morning, my stomach was in knots. He was supposed to return from Chicago that afternoon. By Tuesday, everyone at work would know whether my plan had succeeded or if I'd just ruined my life. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m., I was in the engineering bay when I heard the first whispers. "Did you hear about Richard?" "No, what happened?" "Apparently his wife threw him out last night." "Something about photos?" I froze mid-step. A cold shiver ran down my back. I tried to act casual. "Really, that's crazy." "Yeah, HR's a mess right now." Linda didn't come in either. Something big went down. By noon, the rumor mill was on fire. Someone said she filed for divorce. Someone else claimed she'd emailed corporate HR with evidence of misconduct. Nobody knew the full truth, except me. That night, I sat in my car outside the office parking lot, watching the lights flicker off one by one. The place that had once made me feel powerless now felt like a conquered battlefield. The next morning, Richard showed up, late, disheveled, wearing the same clothes as yesterday. He looked like he hadn't slept. The confidence, the smirk, gone. I watched from a distance as he stormed into Linda's old office, then came out 10 minutes later, red-faced, yelling at his phone, veins bulging in his neck. He didn't even notice me standing by the printer. Later that day, he called a meeting. His voice shook. "Some of you may have heard rumors about my personal life," he said. "I expect professionalism. Anyone spreading lies will face consequences." No one responded. The silence was deafening. He wasn't intimidating anymore. He was pathetic. When the meeting ended, I walked past him toward the door. For a split second, our eyes met. There was something wild in his confusion, anger, fear. I just nodded politely and left. That nod was my victory speech. Within a week, Linda officially filed for divorce. The company launched an internal investigation, not because of ethics, but because Linda's lawyer had threatened to expose everything if corporate didn't act. Richard was suspended pending review. Everyone knew what that meant. Claire found out through an old co-worker. She called me that evening. "Jake, did you hear? Richard's been suspended. They're saying his wife caught him cheating." "Yeah," I said quietly. "Serves him right." "Yeah, it does." She paused. "You sound calm, almost too calm." "Maybe I'm just tired of being angry," I said. And I meant it. The storm inside me was finally settling. Not gone, but quiet. Revenge doesn't come clean. It doesn't feel pure. It burns, even when it's justified. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Claire breathing beside me, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Not triumph, not pride, just peace. Richard's empire of lies had collapsed under its own weight. And all it took was a handful of truth. Thought that was the end of it, that karma had done its job. But I was wrong, because Richard wasn't finished yet. And before it was truly over, he'd try to take me down with him. You think revenge ends when the other person falls? Think again. When you pull the rug out from under someone, they either break or they try to burn the house down with you inside. This is the part where he tries to fight back. If you're here for closure, hit like and subscribe, and stick around for the final chapter. This one's the hardest to tell, because it's the moment I realized revenge has a cost, even when it's deserved. After the divorce announcement and his suspension, I let myself breathe for the first time in years. Claire and I tried to stitch our lives back together. We were cautious with happiness, like people who had been through a storm and now watched the sky for black clouds. We moved slowly, small dinners, long walks, paperwork for marriage licenses, quietly filed and forgotten. In the safe corners, of our lives until finally we set a date. But a wounded man with power doesn't always go quietly. Richard's pride had been stripped, and the look I saw in his eyes at that meeting, and something dangerous and raw, never left me. About a month after Linda left, the subtle attacks began. It started with small things. An anonymous complaint filed against me in HR about a missed deadline I'd never known about. A false note placed in my file about a client meeting I supposedly skipped. A rumor whispered into the ears of people on the production floor that I'd been embezzling petty company funds. None of it stuck, but each one was a pinprick, meant to weaken me, to make others doubt me, to make my life inconvenient. One Friday I found a handwritten note pinned to my locker. Only 3 words, written crooked with a thin black marker. "You'll pay, Jake." My hands went cold, not from fear, from recognition. This was exactly the kind of theatrical bitterness I'd seen in him when he lost control. The tantrum of a man who thinks the world still owes him obedience. I told myself to ignore it. I filed complaints. HR, the legal team, they all nodded and promised investigations. And the company pretended to be moving. But everyone's patience has limits. And when the boss who taught everyone how to fear him lost that power, he started swinging at anything in reach. Then came the letter. A thick envelope, no return address, stamped with corporate insignia, as if the company itself were involved. Inside, a lawyer's note. Linda's attorneys were threatening to go public, with a trove of evidence unless the company cut ties quickly and paid a settlement to protect corporate interest. The note reminded executives of the PR nightmare and of fiduciary duty. It was cold and clinical, and it made the board move. But the real shock came a week later. Richard's lawyer, the same man who had always smoothed his messes, called him with a single piece of news that looked like a grenade with the pin pulled. Criminal charges were being considered. The photos, Linda's testimony, and a few other complaints suddenly looked like more than grounds for divorce. They looked like a reason for law enforcement to step in. In his desperation, Richard made a move so reckless I could only watch it like someone watching a slow car crash. You want to turn away, but you can't. He tried to frame me. He tried to trace the leak. He hired private investigators who asked too many questions about who had access to his office keys, who had been working late, who had motive. He asked managers if anyone had been acting strange, if anyone had been disgruntled. He pulled security footage, but conveniently for me, there had been a camera blind spot near the filing cabinets. He made calls to Linda's friends, trying to paint me as the unstable ex who threatened his marriage. He was trying to manufacture a narrative where I was the villain, not the man who had been wronged. On one rain-soaked afternoon, he cornered me near the loading bay. The rain made my hair stick to my forehead. The smell of oil and metals hung heavy. He was smaller now, like a man shrunk by scandal. But he still had the capacity to terrify. "You think you did something noble?" His voice was thin with hatred. "You think you won?" I let my breath fog in the cold air. My palms were steady. "I didn't ask to be part of this," I said. "You brought it on yourself." He lunged forward, hands twitching. "But security separated us before it became physical." He called me everything he could think of. His face was red, his eyes wet with the collapse of all his carefully constructed lies. That day, he swore he would see me destroyed. He tried legal action. He threatened countersuits claiming theft, extortion, absurdities that on paper could have landed me in trouble. But this time the evidence was solid. Linda's testimony, the photos, witnesses who had seen him with the women. His own arrogance had left trails of ink that couldn't be untangled. The lawyers descended. Depositions, papers, a desperate attempt by Richard to find a technicality, an excuse, a scapegoat. He tried to argue that the photos were doctored, that someone had planted evidence to ruin him. He demanded the company freeze my access. But the board, terrified of scandal, kept me on while they navigated the mess. There were nights I lay awake, thinking about how close everything had come. Revenge had felt clean when it was only a secret in an envelope. Once other people got involved, once lawyers and judges and public filings happened, your actions take on a life of their own. I wasn't just punishing a monster. I'd triggered a legal machine that chewed through lives. One morning, Claire woke me up shaking. She just checked the news. The local paper had a story, a piece about executive misconduct and about a company under investigation. Richard's name was front and center. The headline used words like betrayal and ethical violations. His smug photo from corporate headshots was plastered above the article, looking more grotesque than ever. That day, the board gave him an ultimatum: resign and accept the terms of a private settlement, effectively paying out and disappearing, or face public charges in a lawsuit that could cost him everything. Pride won over prudence. He chose to fight, and when a man chooses to fight alone, he usually loses more. The legal drags became a spectacle. I sat in a small conference room once and watched him through the one-way glass, a man disintegrating under the weight of his choices. Linda was resolute in her testimony. Other women came forward quietly, providing statements. The proofs I had sent were corroborated by other evidence, receipts, messages, dates. When the judge finally read the terms of the settlement, Richard looked like a man who'd been bankrupted by his own vanity. Linda's lawyer had done what he promised. The settlement wiped out much of Richard's savings, forced him to sign away stock options and a non-disparagement clause, and required him to take counseling and make a formal apology. He lost his title. He lost his reputation. He lost his marriage. And the company, eager to move on, quietly terminated him once the legal dust settled. It was clinical. It was painfully bureaucratic, but it was also absolute. I was there the day he cleared out his office. No triumphant scene, no gloating, just cardboard boxes and the soft thunk of things placed inside. He avoided my eyes. For a second, I saw a glimpse of the man behind the mask. Tired, hollowed. A little boy who'd never learned how to be anything but alpha. He lingered by the door as if searching for some part of himself he could still take with him. Then he left. The weeks after his departure were surreal. The production floor slowly returned to routine. People joked again in the break room. Claire and I took a long drive one Sunday, windows down, music low. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked. I stared at the road, thinking of the photos, of the legal papers, of the courthouses and phone calls. "I am," I said, "but not for the reasons I thought." She looked at me confused. "I thought I'd feel triumphant," I explained. "But mostly, I feel tired and grateful and a little guilty." "Guilty?" She tilted her head. "Guilty about what?" she asked softly. "That I had to become someone who steals to get justice. That I had to stoop to his level to top him." I swallowed. But then I remember he started it. He used his power to hurt people. I only returned the favor in a way that stopped him. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. "You did what needed to be done," she said. "You didn't let him get away with it." We married 6 months later in the backyard of a small chapel near town. The wedding was small, just friends, family, and a few co-workers who had watched the whole thing unfold with quiet sympathy. Linda did not attend. She had understandably moved on. But I got the life I wanted, a home, a job I loved, and a woman who had stood beside me. If you ask me now whether what I did was right, I'll give you the honest answer. It's complicated. On one hand, there's a clean satisfaction in seeing a predator stripped of power. There's relief in watching someone who thought himself untouchable be held accountable. That feeling is sweet, like the last bite of a dessert you'd been craving for months. On the other hand, there's a weight that sticks. An image of the man moving out in boxes. The small note on my locker. The nights of legal stress. Revenge is not a one-way street. It changes the person who carries it. I became more calculating than I ever wanted to be. I learned how to hide anger and how to use patience like a weapon. Yet in the end, the scales felt balanced. Claire rebuilt her career. Linda got the truth. Richard got consequences that matched his actions. And I learned that justice sometimes requires courage and sometimes requires moral ambiguity. We live with that. If this story hit you the way it hit me, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, was what I did justified? Would you have done the same? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and ring the bell. We've got more tales of betrayal, patience, and cold, slow justice coming your way. People always ask where the line is between justice and vengeance. I don't have a simple answer. Maybe the line is not a line at all, but a balance you keep in your chest. A tension between what you want and what you must become to get it. I didn't enjoy the ways I had to twist myself. But I slept easier after it was over. Claire and I aren't angry anymore. We married. We laugh about tiny, ridiculous things. We argue about who left the dishes. We plan trips. Life, ordinary, imperfect, beautiful life to returned. And every now and then, when I pass by a boardroom full of pictures and polished smiles, I remember how fragile those facades are. Bad men get away with a lot when people are too scared to act. Sometimes justice needs someone who remembers the hurt and refuses to let it stand. If you've ever been hurt by someone with power, I get it. If you've ever wanted to even the score, I get that too. But remember this, revenge can fix the outside, but it's healing and forgiveness that fix the inside.